Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Development Committee meeting of Monday, October the 16th, and to remind everybody if they could put their cellular devices on an inaudible mode so as not to disturb today's meeting. Members of committee, there is an amended or revised copy of the presentation 6.1 that's before you. And other than that, there are no other changes to the agenda today. Would someone like to move approval? Councillor Dillon, all those in favor? That's carried. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. There are 3 items in consent. Councillor Willens.
Please.
8.2? Okay, thank you. And Councillor Gibson.
I'd like to pull 7.3.
Okay, thank you. Would someone like to move consent agenda as amended? Councillor Willens, all those in favor? That's carried. There's no statutory public meeting reports. We will move now to item 6.1, and if we could bring forward report 7.2 at this time. And I'll turn it over to Bobby Gauthier. Oh, Rob Cooper.
Yeah,
Rob Cooper.
maybe I could take a minute.
Rob Elliott, you're going to do some intros?
Just do a quick introduction to Mr. Gauthier. So Bobby Gauthier is with WSP, which is the consulting firm that the city retained last December to undertake a review of our zoning bylaw. So over the past 10 months, WSP has completed a number of the deliverables, and that's what you're going to hear about today. So Brampton zoning bylaw was last updated in 2004, and that represented a consolidation of 4 existing bylaws that were in place at the time. It's not uncommon for municipalities to have zoning bylaws that are somewhat out of alignment with our official plans due to the length of time it takes to do a comprehensive official plan review. So the zoning bylaw review primarily focuses on bringing our zoning today into conformity with the 2006 official plan, which is the OP that's in effect today. Deliverables include a modern, user-friendly, and more easily understood zoning bylaw that will improve service delivery for the public and to the development industry. So 4 public events are planned for the project, and the first scheduled open house is for December of this year. So the first draft of the zoning bylaw will be available in 2019, and the implementation of it will happen shortly thereafter. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Mr. Gauthier to complete the presentation today.
Great, thank you. Councillor Willens, you're on the board. Okay, thank you. I thought maybe you had a question of the Commissioner. Welcome.
Thanks very much, and it's great to meet you, Madam Chair, and members of committee. So this is my first time speaking with committee. Very pleased to be here. The intent of this presentation is really to introduce the project, explain the purpose of the project, go over the work program for this project, including the consultation program. I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce our first major deliverable on the project, which is the zoning issues and analysis report, which I believe is attached to the agenda. So before I get into the purpose of the project, it might be worth just taking a couple of minutes and providing a little bit of background information. The zoning bylaw is really just one piece of the planning framework in the city of Brampton and in any municipality in Ontario. It represents really the most detailed planning document amongst all of those listed on the slide. So it's important to recognize that the zoning bylaw doesn't exist in a vacuum, but rather it takes direction from other documents. At the provincial level, you'll find the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, which provides overall direction to municipalities to plan for healthy, sustainable, compact communities. Moving down the hierarchy, you'll find the city's official plan and the more detailed secondary plans and block plans that provide more detailed policy direction about how to make land use planning decisions in Ontario. And then the zoning bylaw is at the bottom of the hierarchy, not because it's the least important document, but because it represents the most detail. And it's a regulatory document that implements all of those planning policy frameworks. The current zoning bylaw, as was mentioned earlier, is zoning bylaw number 270-2004, and I think it's worthwhile to explain a little bit about the history of that bylaw. So the bylaw came together, it originated in 2004, and it represented a consolidation of the former bylaws of the previous municipalities prior to amalgamation. What that means is the city did not undertake a comprehensive review of those provisions to ensure that it was in conformity with the policy in place at the time. Rather, it was a technical consolidation, and that's typical for many municipalities. So some of the provisions in the bylaw, they date back to those original bylaws, back to the 1980s. And of course, like any zoning bylaw in Ontario, it's gone through many amendments over the years, amendments as a result of development applications, and amendments as a result of housekeeping exercises and updates to the zoning provisions to implement specific planning studies. So as it stands right now, the zoning bylaw has not been reviewed for conformity with the official plan, but that's a very normal thing. You do your policy before you implement the zoning afterwards. What's regulated by a zoning bylaw? So many things are regulated by a zoning bylaw. The key thing is that permitted uses are regulated by zoning bylaws. So, can I build a single detached dwelling on my property? Can I build a factory on my property? That's what the zoning bylaw says. It also has very detailed provisions to set out built form, the location of buildings, the height of buildings, massing, parking requirements, lot size, lot frontage. So zoning bylaws are very detailed in nature, and they do apply sort of on a site-by-site basis. It's worth noting also that the city maintains a dedicated website for the zoning bylaw, and on this website at brampton.ca/zoning, residents can take a look at an interactive map and confirm the zoning for their property. So it's a nice customer service feature. The purpose of the project, so that's just a little bit of background and context around what the zoning bylaw is and what the current status is. The purpose of this project is to prepare, we anticipate, a brand new zoning bylaw for the city of Brampton, repealing and replacing the current zoning bylaw that's in effect. And some of our objectives and what I would call opportunities through that process is of course, making the zoning bylaw more modern, updating the provisions so they reflect more contemporary building standards and building practices, making the zoning bylaw easier to use, easier to administer, clearer, better, more clear language that can be read by most people. But of course, the fundamental responsibility that we have in reviewing the zoning bylaw is implementing the city's official plan. That is the Planning Act requirement, to review and update the zoning bylaw for conformity with the official plan. So like I said earlier, the zoning bylaw is older than the official plan, and that is totally normal. Many municipalities in the province are in a very similar situation, but now it's time to review the zoning bylaw and ensure that it conforms to the official plan. What that means, in a sense, is, the official plan sets out land use designations, and within those land use designations, there are policies that guide permitted uses. So within a certain area, it might say, auto service stations are not permitted. We need to make sure that the zoning bylaw similarly does not permit auto service stations, just as a conceptual example. Actually, while I'm on that slide, one more point I was asked to make is with regards to pre-zoning and the option of pre-zoning to bring the zoning bylaw into conformity with the official plan. So certainly, I think pre-zoning is an approach where you increase, permitted density, permitted height as of right in the zoning bylaw, so that when future development applications come forward, they don't have to amend the bylaw. They can just build in accordance with what the official plan intends for. I certainly think pre-zoning represents a viable option to address an issue of non-conformity. So, where the zoning bylaw doesn't align with the permitted uses, the height, the density requirements of the official plan, I think there's an opportunity to pre-zone to address that conformity issue. But I think it's important to note that pre-zoning works best within a detailed planning framework. So where there is a secondary plan, where detailed analysis has been undertaken to inform that pre-zoning, that's where it's a viable option. I understand from the city that there are some areas of the city where that detailed study hasn't taken place and where pre-zoning is not likely to be a viable solution to implement those policies. That includes the major transit station areas, strategic growth areas, as well as mobility hubs. So in summary, pre-zoning I think is a good option to address a conformity issue, but at this time we're not considering pre-zoning within certain areas of the city where we're not informed by detailed planning analysis. So a really common theme of this presentation, I think, is the relationship between the official plan and the zoning bylaw. I keep talking about the official plan, but it's extremely important for people's understanding in case anyone is not totally familiar with the difference between the two documents. The official plan is a broader policy document. It guides land use planning decisions. It tells us at a high level where land uses are permitted and what those land uses should look like in a general way. The zoning bylaw is much more detailed. So where the official plan might say low density residential in this area, the zoning bylaw will say single detached dwellings in that same area. The other difference between the two documents that I think is worth noting is that the zoning bylaw is a legal tool. It's a legal enforceable bylaw, and contravention of that document can result in penalties and fines. As mentioned, the timeline in the process for this project, we anticipate to be about 3 years in total. We're coming up to the tail end of the first year and wrapping up phase 1-1, which culminated in the development of the zoning issues and analysis report that's before you today. The work that's ongoing currently is development of a series of technical papers in which we will look at specific planning issues and make recommendations about how to revise the zoning bylaw to address those issues. In phase 1-3, we'll bring everything together into what we call a zoning bylaw strategy report. We'll recommend a table of contents. The look, the feel of the zoning bylaw will come about through that document. And then finally, in phase 2, we will prepare the new zoning bylaw in draft with the intent of releasing it for public consultation by spring of 2019. Phase 3 really represents the city's internal implementation of that document once the zoning bylaw is brought into effect. In terms of the consultation program, we've designed a consultation program that I think responds really well to anticipated milestones and anticipated involvement by the public. So we have a total of 4 public events or touch points with the public directly. The first one we're planning for December of this year to present the zoning issues and analysis report. We have another touch point, another meeting with the public planned about mid next year to present the zoning strategy report. And then, at least in my experience, what I find is most people tend to become very interested in the zoning bylaw review process when you actually release the draft zoning bylaw. That's why we planned a series of open houses upon the public release of the draft zoning bylaw. So we'll have, I think, likely about three or four public meetings in which we'll present that bylaw to the public for input. And then finally, the statutory public meeting when we present the final draft version of the zoning bylaw. I will note also that we do encourage and accept written input throughout the process. So people can log onto this website, brampton.ca/zoning review, find contact information, and we'll accept and respond to all input received. Just to really briefly introduce our first major deliverable, which we call the Zoning Issues and Analysis Report. The report is background in nature. We've taken a deep look at the zoning bylaw, the official plan. We've come up with a list of issues and things that need to be addressed in the current zoning bylaw. So the document doesn't contain specific recommendations, but rather it's almost like a work plan for addressing these specific issues that we need to look into further. So it provides a list of technical papers that we will be addressing as part of the ongoing work on the project. If it's not already posted on the website, our intent is to post it on the website by the end of the month, and we will present it publicly in December and asking for comments by the end of the year. So some next steps. Like I said, our first public open house to introduce the project and present that report is December of this year. The intent is to produce a series of technical papers to address the key issues that we identify in that paper in more detail and come up with some recommendations for addressing them in the new zoning bylaw. Mid-2018, we will have our zoning issues and strategy report produced, which will bring together all of those technical papers, recommend a table of contents for the zoning bylaw, recommend all the new zones, and then the first draft zoning bylaw will be released, we anticipate, in spring of 2019. So thank you very much for your attention and for your time today. Happy to take questions and comments. And I'll just quickly note that Yuri Mansfitov is the project contact on the city's end. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Members of committee, I just want to draw to your attention, the printed agenda says the presentation relates to 7.2, but it's actually 7.1. So, Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you for the presentation. Certainly if there's one thing that's long overdue is really modernizing our zoning bylaw. And I guess the obvious question, I don't know in terms of the inputs that you have, but I assume inputs would be our population growth, our inputs would be projects that for example, the Larry Beasley's working on. Does all that stuff get taken into consideration? And the reason I say that is because certainly with the intensification that's happening and with the type of, I guess, housing development that we want to encourage, I guess our zoning bylaw would reflect that. And that's just more, I guess, for my logic. But I think those inputs are important. But in the driveways, that's been, if there's something that I've heard loud and clear, or one thing, the issue I've been constantly contacted on is around the driveway. And it seems, from my understanding, getting to know more around the issue, is that our zoning bylaw was so outdated to a point that some of the applications of home developments didn't really reflect what our zoning bylaw permitted or not, meaning when someone takes over a new home and I guess they try to do anything that they've already contravened our zoning bylaw, which is outdated. So I know I threw a lot out there, but it's just that I'm really excited about this. Hopefully we get more clarity on the issue. So.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair, if I can respond. Well, first of all, I'm glad you're excited about the project. We certainly are too. With respect to your first point, your first question about considering some of the ongoing work, I think it's important to note that our principal responsibility is ensuring that the zoning bylaw conforms to the policy in place when we bring it forward for adoption. But if there are some new directions that come about through, Larry Beasley's work or some other work, as much as possible, we'll want to align with that, but fundamentally, we need to ensure that the zoning bylaw conforms to current policy. One thing that we look at a little bit in the zoning issues and analysis report are some of the recently completed projects and some of the ongoing projects. And I think that with respect to recently completed projects, I certainly expect that they will inform the zoning bylaw. I can give you an example is the city undertook a review of sustainability standards to inform the development review process. And that's something that could very well inform the zoning bylaw, just as an example. With respect to driveways, as much as possible, we'll want the zoning bylaw to conform and be consistent with any engineering standards that the city has. So that certainly is a component of our work program. So if there have been any inconsistencies or conflicts in the way driveways are being constructed, and the engineering standards in the zoning bylaw, will want to rectify any of those inconsistencies for sure through this process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Pertini.
A couple of questions. For the height restrictions on the homes we have, does it go all over Brampton or a certain height on the bylaw we have? Just
Through you, Madam Chair, so
that's residential.
is the question regarding...
Well, we have a height restriction. I think it's like 28 feet on residential areas that we can go on height. But are we going to take into consideration, like you get parts of Brampton, like the older part, like Avondale, and stuff like the new home, they're mostly all buried. So when you hit a certain height, and we have this height restriction, it forces the residents to make a flat roof because of the height. So we're gonna look into that, the height too.
Absolutely. The review of the zoning bylaw will include a comprehensive review of all of the residential zones. And as part of that, we'll be looking at whether the height makes sense based on the neighborhoods that it's being applied to. So in a certain area, if there is, say, an R2 zone, and if the height is not consistent with the established character of the community, we can certainly give consideration to modifying that and making sure that the height makes sense in the context of that community. So I guess the short answer is yes, we will be doing a very comprehensive review of height requirements.
And what Councilor Madero says, under driveways. So I know this summer walking around, there's a lot of residents that are having the problem on the basement apartments, that they like to apply for a basement apartment, but we have a bylaw. You have to have 5.4 meters from the shower valve to the road. So at the end of the day, they can't even apply. So if these permits were given out in the past with a shower valve at 2 meters or 3 meters, your water valve, and they're still using this driveway as a city property, why was, they can't apply? I just don't get it. Like, if we could look into that too. I think,
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. As I understand, the city undertook a second suite study in the last few years. Certainly our intent would be to carry forward the recommendations out of that study into this zoning bylaw. But if there are any aspects of it that aren't working, we can certainly review it and just make sure that it's working well for the city.
And last one, under driveways, I've noticed a lot of municipalities, they have to get a permit for the driveways. I talked to Elizabeth, because it holds them responsible too at the same time. I've just seen now driveways just being cut, 2 feet, and residents don't know. The contractor grabs his money and runs, and the residents are stuck with this problem. If you go to Richmond Hill, I know Newmarket, then they have a bylaw that you have to get a permit, so at least they kind of know, and usually the contractor for that $50 goes and get it. That's one thing I really like to look into, because there's a big problem with the driveway issues.
Okay,
Thank
sure.
you.
Thank you.
Councillor Miles.
You're going to have to help me understand the big picture, and I certainly understand the need to update our zoning bylaw to make sure that it is in compliance with all of the policies and whatnot that we have adopted already in the past where it's not reflective of that. But I guess the first question is when we do change when we do a study and change a policy, like in the case of the driveways, is that not automatically incorporated into the existing zoning bylaw?
Through you, Madam Chair. In some cases, if the city undertakes a detailed policy study, they will initiate a zoning bylaw amendment and implement that into the current bylaw. And certainly I would expect that the city's current zoning bylaw does include many different amendments over the years to implement various policy studies. So our intent would be to carry forward those recommendations.
Yeah,
but
so we don't just do these studies and then leave them hanging out there. We actually incorporate them into the existing zoning bylaw, right?
That's correct. Through you, Madam Chair, just to speak specifically with respect to driveways, because it's a huge issue, and I'm sure you're all experiencing it. That is actually one of the newer sections of our zoning bylaw, most recently updated in 2006 after a very comprehensive review and study. That was done fairly recently compared to some of the other development and performance standards for residential development.
Okay, so explain to me why you would be using the 2006 official plan when we are going to be undergoing another official plan. So you're going to spend this year, the next 2 years, trying to make our zoning bylaw comply with a 2006 official plan, when as soon as we finish our official plan, the zoning bylaw isn't going to be compliant with it.
Sure.
How does that make sense?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot of value. I'll defer the question to city staff after if they want to add on to this, but I think there's a lot of value in updating the zoning bylaw now to conform to the current official plan that's in effect. One opportunity that exists here is that we can modernize the bylaw. We can produce a new bylaw that's easier to use, that, integrates improvements, reflects more contemporary building standards. As I noted, the current bylaw, many of the provisions date to the 1980s. So some of the provisions are certainly very out of date. So I think this represents an opportunity to set up a much more modern bylaw. And then when the city does complete its official plan review, which may be a number of years away, the city will simply need to update the bylaw that we produce rather than prepare a new bylaw. So I think the exercise is valuable in terms of setting up the city to be able to more easily implement the official plan in the future.
So is that the intent then, that we're going to get this in place, and when we do finish our OP review, that we will have the mechanism that will trigger whatever changes need to happen within the zoning bylaw, or is it going to be another 3-year review?
Through you, Madam Chairman, Bobby has essentially sort of nailed it in terms of the reasons why we're doing the review now.
I know why we're doing it now. I'm just trying to figure out the logistics between aligning it to a 2006
Right, understood.
OP when we're going to be having an updated official plan.
Right. So
Hopefully,
through you, Madam Chair, we will have an updated official plan. It's a timing issue. We need a good base to go forward with, and we don't have a good base at the moment. So we want to establish that good base, a modern zoning bylaw that's up-to-date, contemporary, and is user-friendly. And that'll make the process of conforming that official plan, or that zoning bylaw to a new official plan, much easier, less time-consuming, less costly. And so that's the reason why we're moving forward today with the 2006 OP as the document to conform to. I should say that our next official plan review, the reviews are lengthy processes, and you're always at the Ontario Municipal Board after you finish these days. So, we're into a 3-year process, and then we're into a conformity review as well with the growth plan, and then we're into likely an approval at the regional level, and then likely appeals to the board. So we're into a lengthy process. We don't want to wait until that process has unraveled. It could be 5, 6, 7 years before we have a final OP. So it's important to get that bylaw up and ready and modernized today.
So as we adopt new policies, we're going through this future ready, whatnot, and we are adopting changes some of our policies and practices in regards to the Planning Act. Will those, as we make decisions, will we be implementing changes to the official plan? Will we be adopting changes to the official plan, which would automatically mean that it's going to be reflected in the new zoning bylaw?
Through you, Madam Chairman, it really depends on the extent of the change that's required to the official plan. If there is a trickle-down effect into a zoning provision or standard or requirement, we have this opportunity to basically fold that into the zoning bylaw review. There may be cases where the official plan is the only document that needs to be amended. So it really depends on sort of the issue that's before us. But if there's an opportunity to fold that into the zoning bylaw review, we will do that.
Okay, so this is complicated, sorry. And it's what's causing me problems is trying to figure out the dates and the timings. And okay, so we're going through a lot of planning changes right now. We're trying to get future ready, yet we're going through a zoning bylaw, and we're using a 2006 official plan that we know already is outdated, and a lot of the policies in there are outdated. But if we do an OP, or if we do any looking and revisions to whatever it is that the municipality is doing, we want to have it conform to the policies in the 2006 official plan rather than conforming to the policies that we're going to have in the new 2018-19 official plan. And then in the meantime, we've been told that we have to make sure that whatever we do conforms to the policies that are already in place.
Councillor Miles, and I'm going to ask David Waters, just to expand a little bit. You said you wanted to start this process on a solid base. The 2006 OP is that solid base. There was a conformity exercise that took place in 2010, but there were appeals to the OMB and there are some outstanding matters related to that. So the last time we were on solid footing with the OP, as I understand it, because we had this conversation on Friday when we did pre-agenda, was 2006. 2006 was done, approved eventually, and it's done. The conformity exercises that have taken place since then and subsequent appeals and outstanding issues is what makes it wonky to try and refer it back to that conformity exercise, if that helps at all.
Okay, well, it still doesn't make any sense to me, however.
Sorry.
That's because I'm trying to think of this maybe logically, and sometimes planning issues aren't always logical. So, one-off issue, grandfathering. So when we go through this bylaw review, we know we live in an aging community, and we have many neighborhoods and subdivisions that probably 80% of the property owners that live within that existing community, the things that they've done, the changes to their property are not going to conform to the existing provisions within the zoning bylaw. Sheds, accessory buildings, fences, mini roofs, all of that kind of thing. And we've had this issue before. Some of these have been in place for 45 years. New neighbor moves in, says, oh my God, it's contravening the zoning bylaw, phones bylaw comes out, and then tells them to change it, and they said, oh, that's silly, it's been here for 45 years. Yeah, but I don't care, it's contravening the zoning bylaw. City tells them to move it, and then they say, okay, well, here's a list of 25 other houses in this subdivision that don't conform to the zoning bylaw, and I would like to see you make sure that those people conform to the existing zoning bylaw. We have got to do something about that situation, and it's one that we've tried to deal with without really dealing with it. And so for me, when I get an 80-year-old woman who calls me and says my husband died last year and now the city's telling me to take down my little covered porch that my husband and I have been sitting under for the last 45 years, I am sympathetic. So we have to, that is one within the zoning bylaw. We need grandfathering. If something has been in place for a period of 5 or 10 years, nobody's complained, it should be considered okay. You know, if it's at the time a 1 year or a 2 year, I see that. But when we're looking at something that, I know Rick's coming down because he's heard me harp on this many times. Maybe he's found a solution, but we really have to do something about this and then ensure that it's incorporated in the zoning bylaw so that our officers are enforcing what's in conformity, not what's not. So, do you want to speak? Can we ask Rick to speak?
Absolutely.
Madam Chair?
Through you, Madam Chair. It is a very complicated subject that you speak of. And I just want to clarify, I guess, one thing, that every zoning bylaw has the possibility of a legal non-conforming existence of some sort of structure. The difference lies in whether or not that structure was created under a previous provision of a zoning bylaw or if it existed prior to any zoning provisions ever existing on that property. Establishing that that is the case gives that structure legal non-conforming status under the zoning bylaw. We run into this every day. What becomes difficult is when you have illegal construction or something that happened illegally and has existed nonetheless for a period of 10, 15 years, and then we come across it and we find that, yeah, you've had it for that long, you just haven't been caught, right? And so we go back to those people, and we try to be sympathetic as well, understanding that the situation is they may have inherited it, it may have been constructed to owners prior to them owning it, but nonetheless we have an obligation to ensure that those requirements of the zoning bylaw are met. In some cases it seems like a very bureaucratic exercise when you're talking about a shed in somebody's backyard. Other cases could be more extreme, where somebody's built an addition into the backyard, has expanded the property into the point that it's infringing on others' enjoyment of their own backyards. And so it's very widespread. What we also run into is the fact that when these people are faced with a situation where they have to bring something into compliance, we have that vexatious complaint situation where, as you said, somebody will call in, and we had this just last week, as a matter of fact, that somebody facing an order under the building code for construction of a deck has called in 25, 30 other properties on that street that this person is claiming have done the same thing. And at this point in time, because we don't have that vexatious complaint strategy, we are investigating each and every one of those. I don't have a good solution in place for vexatious complaints yet. Paul and I in bylaw enforcement are still working on that, and we hope to come back to see you with a report to address that. But it is complex from the perspective that the municipality does have an obligation to enforce what's under the zoning bylaw. But the fact of somebody going out there and playing vigilante and complaining about everybody on their street or everybody in the subdivision is something that we do have to address. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you on that one yet. In terms of the grandfathering, though, the legal non-conforming process does exist with every zoning.
But we know the problem isn't with the legal non-conforming.
Yes.
A lot of it is the simple stuff that property owners have done, and everybody along the street did it, and everybody thought it was a good idea, and nobody cared until somebody moved in and said, I don't like my neighbor, and I'm going to complain about this. And there should be a statute of limitations on when we as a municipality can go in and enforce that for our own good health. Like, I think for our own sake, there should be a statute of limitation on this, and we need to find what that is, decide what that is, and put it into the zoning bylaw so that we can say, our zoning bylaw says that this has been in place for X amount of years, even though it's illegal, non-conforming, it is now legal because of the statute of limitations.
And through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate that suggestion, and I'm sure we can take that back and consider, but you do have to consider that there is a broad range of what may illegally exist, and that could come back to bite us in the end, right?
Yeah, but it may not bite us as hard as the 50 neighbors on the street or in the subdivision that want to chew our faces off because we're telling them all to change something that they've had for I know, sorry. So anyway, that's one. But I'm good luck in this. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
The more I'm finding out, the more I understand you're going to have a lot of work ahead of you. So when you come to pieces of the zoning bylaw today that aren't working, how do you deal with that? Does it go back to the operating or to the department? And then you say, well, okay, in our public consultation, we found that this part of the zoning bylaw really it doesn't work. It needs to be addressed. How do we address that? Or don't we?
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Certainly if city staff raise any issues about things that aren't working in the zoning bylaw, or council, or members of the public, we're able to evaluate those issues and make changes to the bylaw. So what we bring forward in spring of 2019 will be a brand new zoning bylaw. It'll introduce a whole host of different changes that are driven by a number of different reasons. Official plan conformity, making corrections to the bylaw, and certainly if people have an issue with the way the provisions are working, then that's our opportunity to address it. So.
Okay, but again, that doesn't really answer my question. Rick? Sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair, I may be able to answer your question, Councillor. We do, pardon me, we do keep an ongoing list of reoccurring items that tend to pop up. So if we have something that we see as an issue on multiple occasions, we do keep track of it, and specifically we wait for opportunities such as this to make those corrections in the bylaw moving forward.
Okay, Madam Chair, I'm sorry about taking so much time, but I figure if I don't understand all of this, probably a lot of members of council don't, and maybe this is helpful. But we're talking about property standards bylaw here, but this overall overarching zoning bylaw also deals with all the planning issues, right? Planning issues where it says this is this property and these are the different kinds of things that we can do on that property. But that's going to conform to the 2006 OP, not to what we think should happen within our future getting ready for the future changes to property uses.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the zoning bylaw will be developed to conform to the 2006 official plan. But if there's opportunities for us to align the zoning bylaw with emerging planning work that's being undertaken currently, we will take those opportunities. But at the end of the day, we must bring forward a zoning bylaw that we can confidently say conforms to the 2006 official plan.
Okay, so what you said doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay.
So you said, yeah, we're going to take these new policies, we're going to make sure that we incorporate these new policies, but not unless they conform. How do you make them conform to the existing bylaw if they don't?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think it's important to recognize what conformity means in the first place, right?
Maybe that's where I'm missing.
Yeah, I would imagine that in much of the city, the planning directions will not change substantially even through your new official plan review. So I'm thinking about the mature neighborhoods of the city, certain areas that may not be planned for a lot of change. As much as we can, we will consider any new emerging planning directions in those areas, but I wouldn't expect the planning directions in those mature areas will change a whole lot. So when we bring those areas into conformity with the current official plan, it's likely to conform to the new stuff as well because we don't anticipate a lot of change. There are some areas of the city that probably will change as a result of the new official plan review. So for example, some of the intensification areas and corridors,
Yes,
maybe
that's what I'm
the
thinking.
delineation of those corridors will change. Maybe the anticipated height and densities of those corridors and nodes will change. And we're kind of limited in our ability to try to conform to that. Like in that circumstance, our direction will be to conform to the 2006 official plan. And if there's going to be a lot of change for those areas through the new official plan review, we're likely to be very limited in our ability to align with the emerging planning directions for those areas.
So will you actually, once the work's done, you'll take that work and park it for the new OP review? So it's not wasted?
Through Madam Chair, precisely. Yeah. There's likely going to be some areas of the city that we can't align it with the new planning framework. So when the city completes its new official plan review, it's very likely going to have to initiate another zoning bylaw amendment to implement the directions of that new official plan review. And that's very normal. That's very typical for municipalities. A zoning bylaw review is required within 3 years of completing an official plan review. So it'll have to review the zoning bylaw after completing the new official plan.
Thank you very much. My apologies.
Oh, it's okay, Councillor Miles. I'm almost thinking that staff should maybe give some thought to having a roundtable conversation with members of council and planning staff. Just talk about the frequent or recurring themes that the zoning folks deal with from a bylaw perspective, and some of the calls that come into our office and the issues that seem to, whether it's driveways or other things that come into our office that we feel we get, that may be issues that need to be addressed. So if you could just sort of take that under advisement, maybe a lunch and learn or something.
The other thing we need to take a look at is where philosophies of the city, or the culture we're trying to build in the city, are not aligning with our zoning bylaw. So on one hand, we're encouraging one thing to happen within our communities, and then the zoning bylaw doesn't allow for it. So that's another area. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Councillor Pelletier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I agree with Councillor Miles, and now I agree with the Chair saying that I think that would be an excellent exercise for members of council, because if not all members of council really understand it, then no nobody from the public is going to understand it. And, I understand why we're attaching it to the 2006. I'm not going to try and to explain why that is, but because I think it'll come off gibberish like Councilor Miles you've heard today so far. But not saying that this is gibberish. I understand why we're doing it. I guess my issue is like what Councilor Miles was saying about the rules and regulations about the little old Mrs. Smith that's now dealing with the loss of her husband and has something that is becoming an issue for the city for whatever reason. And thank you, Rick, for coming and kind of giving us that balance. And I understand what you're saying. My problem with a lot of those issues are, and I've said it before, real estate agents, and the fact that they'll sell a house with whatever wrong with it. It doesn't matter if it's has a conforming use or not, a legal basement or not, and that I think we need this as a catalyst to spring into some kind of policies that state if you're going to sell a house that is non-conforming, then you cannot sell a house in Brampton. And we need something along those lines to say if you have a real estate license in Brampton, you have to abide by these rules. You have to know what the rules are, and if you break the rules, then you're going to lose your license. I think we need them to be our eyes and ears out there. We can't be always going around looking for. I think we're so many bylaw enforcement officers into the budget already. We don't, exactly want you to come back to us every year requesting more and more. And then with residents, you do get some residents that are upset with their neighbors and calling on them, and then you get other people that just have gone the right route and the door's been closed or there's too many roadblocks, so they start saying, well, what about the 10 other people on my street that have the exact same thing? And so I really think that we need to push this back on real estate agents, and I don't know what we're doing. I just don't think we're doing enough. I know a couple of real estate agents that won't even take a listing because it has an illegal basement or something to the effect of it not conforming with our rules and regulations. So, but I know there's lots of agents out there that will. So I don't know if you can comment on that, Rob. I saw you.
Yes, through the chair. I think our ability to limit the real estate industry is pretty much non-existent in terms of requiring them to comply. I mean, maybe through an education approach or some other means we could help purchasers and sellers alike understand what zoning permissions are in place on their property. I think education might be our better bet opposed to regulation with that industry.
Right, but you need a real estate license, and that's Ontario governed, I believe, provincial governed. But then you need something else to actually sell homes in Brampton, do you not?
Not to my knowledge, but I can look into that and report back.
Okay, maybe if we can.
I don't know that we regulate them.
If it's an education session, and I've asked for it before, that would be definitely a good thing. I thought there was something else that you needed in Brampton specifically for, not necessarily selling homes, but to advertise or something along those lines. I'm not sure, but.
Yeah. So we'll take that under advisement and look at what options are available and report back.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
Just a little bit on that, what Councillor Fletcher's talking about. We did do this exercise a few years ago with the industry to try to, and we worked very well with the industry, the Brampton Real Estate Board, to try to educate their agents and work with their ethics committee. And they were very cooperative. Unfortunately, a lot of things have changed over the last few years, and the Brampton Real Estate Board doesn't even have an MLS system anymore. It's all under Toronto Real Estate Board or something else it's called now. in their MLS systems, and more and more the agents are coming from other municipalities to sell in Brampton, where when I was selling real estate before I got on council, I'd say 90% of the people that were selling homes in Brampton were under Brampton Real Estate Board. But that's not, it's really more of a, I think, of a social club now than it is a governing body. But we can't, we went through this exercise, we can't control the real estate board. What we can is, as Rob has said, try to educate people. But I think we have to more educate the people that are buying and selling, not necessarily the people that are selling them. Because we'd have real difficulty trying to control agents that are coming from Toronto, Mississauga, Oakville, whatever, to sell homes. In fact, it'd be impossible to control them. But if anybody that sells a home with illegal intentions can be held liable. And that includes the homeowner, not just the agent that's selling it. Because it's up to the homeowner to let the agents know what's in the home, what's wrong with the home. That's not just basement apartments, but it could be anything that's wrong with the home. And then it's up to the agent to make sure they let the people that are purchasing know that. Everybody is held accountable if they don't, including the person selling, including the person that owns. So, as Rob has said, it may be better for us to try to educate the people that live in Brampton as they're selling. Unfortunately, you can't get to the people that are coming from outside of Brampton to buy. So it's got to come from the people that are selling, to educating that. And a lot of people don't know this. When I was in real estate, there's a lot of people that would lie to the real estate agent, not really aware of that they could be held liable for what they tell a real estate agent as well as the real estate agent selling. If they don't tell the real estate agent what's in the house or what's wrong with the house, then they're held liable for it too. It's not the agent's fault if they can't take that in. So that may be a way to go through that. But we have gone through that exercise many years ago. We first started dealing with this, so it's difficult. It really is. Thank you.
We sort of took a bit of a side trip there, but I think it was worthwhile, and I'm serious about staff. You take under advisement because, and it's not just sort of the recurring issues, but it's also sometimes the one-off. And I'll dare to mention the word Quonset hut, Mr. CAO. I think that was probably one of the first things. Where are they appropriate? Are they appropriate in the city? It was probably a one-off, but it was very emotional for the area councillors, for the neighborhood, and for the adjacent neighbors. So I think that things like that also need to be addressed. So I think really a lunch and learn roundtable, just call it a good old-fashioned bitch session if you want, because that's pretty much what it'll end up being. Where you sort of hear the things that we hear when we're at the farmer's market or we're, fielding calls in our office. So I'll leave that with staff. Okay, the other comments, and I guess we can save it for the roundtable. First of all, a lot of people, home purchasers, think that when they buy title insurance, that they're protecting the title of that home and that everything within that title is legal and conforming. And so when they get caught as a new owner with something that some neighbor has called about, they think they're protected because of title insurance. So there's a huge education piece that does need to take place with home purchasers. On the driveways, what we do not do is a really good job of communicating to the public and homeowners of why you can't have a driveway that covers the front lawn. And it's not because it's ugly, and it's not because we're trying to control basement apartments. It's because there is only so much capacity in a neighborhood for stormwater management, regardless of what system is used, whether it's a stormwater management pond or the catch basins that, take it into the Etobicoke Creek. There is only so much capacity. And with climate change, it is going to get worse. So what we need to look at in the zoning, this was kind of a long way to say, in the zoning bylaw, we need to look at permeable surface driveways. We need to look at a way to better manage stormwater management, because if there are four cars in a home, because kids are staying at home longer, or because of they've got a legal or legal non-conforming basement apartments, they need room, the capacity for vehicles, but we need to manage the bigger picture, which is the consequences of climate change. And somehow that message is being lost when we communicate it back to the homeowner. They just think that we're digging our heels in, and you can't widen your driveway, and you can't park too close to the property line, and so on. But it is a much bigger and much more serious issue. So the communication piece, both during and following the implementation of the zoning bylaw, needs to be robust. You've got to get the message out there. In the mature neighborhoods, it's not just the decks, the sheds, the hedges, the fences that are non-compliant. It is also, they've got large trees, the tree preservation bylaw. If you look in some of these older neighborhoods where they're large lots and people are buying them to put up a bigger home, we're losing some very large and mature trees in this city, and people are not respecting the tree preservation bylaw. They're taking out these trees, which is upsetting the neighborhoods and just cascades through. So I'll leave that with you. I do need someone to move receipt of the presentation. Councillor Medeiros, all in favor? That's carried. And if someone could move 7.1, Councillor Bowman, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So we'll move now to 7.2, which is the official plan review. It is an update. It's very much complementary to the work that is going to be done. Are there any questions on 7.2? It is the official plan review update. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Oh, everybody's leaving us. 7.2, the growth forecasts. I don't even know who I'm speaking to on this. Who? David, am I speaking to you? Okay. The growth forecasts that Hemson has been working with are the growth forecasts that they've been given. Do those include all the illegal basement apartments and non-conforming units that we don't have records for?
Through you, Madam Chairman, the forecasts would have included an assumption regarding those types of units. So yes, they would have assumed a certain proportion of population coming from those types of dwellings.
Okay, and it maintains that we're going to be 890,000 residents and 321,000 jobs. Those are the assumptions that they're still working on for this report?
Through you, Madam Chairman, yes, those are the numbers that the city has provided to the region and that the region will be bringing forward through their growth management ROPA, which is, I believe, coming forward in October 26th to Regional Council.
Okay, because I thought at council we passed a motion that we were going to try and get to 40% employment.
Through you, Madam Chairman, I believe you passed a motion with a target of trying to achieve 40% by 2041. But however, based on our existing land supply and our densities within these employment areas, we're not able to achieve that 40%. But we have it on the record that that's council's objective, and we are moving forward to try to achieve that. This 321 does not prevent us from achieving that. It's a number that has to be plugged into the regional official plan amendment. You have to remember, Councillor, that all other municipalities are trying to achieve employment numbers and they're slicing a pie, and this is the slice we've been given, but it doesn't preclude us from achieving the 40%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Miles.
No. If we have today an applicant come forward to build a high-rise building, and the zoning bylaw today allows for X amount, but we as let's say 12 stories, 14 stories, but we as a municipality feels that property could probably go to 22, 24 stories. Do we have the ability to upzone the property? Because sometimes with these particular applications, the existing developer, builder, owner might not, might not personally have the capacity in order to build a bigger building, but if we actually do the upzoning, they could perhaps find a partner and not want to go through that whole process again.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. That's certainly within our control to decide what we want to permit in terms of higher densities and things like that. And as Mr. Waters alluded to earlier, these are targets. We have every ability to either exceed, surpass, or come in short on those as we see fit. In Toronto, they did exceed their residential forecasts. Employment, it's certainly a lofty goal, but we will do everything we can to attract employment into the city. So really, this is about a planning exercise in terms of where infrastructure and the timing of infrastructure. And we've also even worked with the region to say, if we were to attract major employment, would they offer some flexibility to make sure that that can happen? So remember that that is a planning exercise. It is not a glass ceiling by any means. We still have the ability to make our own destiny.
Okay, so, sorry. So I'm talking about residential intensification, and I'm talking about an application that might come up at a certain density that we believe the property could actually have a lot more density. Can we as a municipality within the zoning bylaw, when that application is made, like usually we just keep it to exactly what the applicant is asking for. Could we not at the time actually upzone it? So they may be asking for 20 stories. Could we not within the zoning bylaw say, put in there the capacity to reach 30 stories? If we believe that could be accommodated.
Through the chair, right now, individuals would have as-of-use rights through the zoning. So whatever's in place today, they would have that entitlement. It would be difficult to thrust higher permissions on them without going through our own OP or zoning exercise in advance. They could come to the table, and as we've recently done, though, when we're not pleased with those permissions that are in place today, we have the authority and have exercised that authority to implement an internal or interim control bylaw, rather, which would freeze that until we can study it and then put in the appropriate zoning or OP designations that we're looking for.
Okay, so, God, I don't know, something's happening today where, so, if the applicant is going through an official plan amendment already for let's say a 22-story building, and we think that it could go to 30, can we not, in the actual zoning bylaw, put in there the ability for it to be a 30-story building?
Through the chair, the short answer is we have to encourage them and not force them. They have the right to build what their current zoning or OP permissions are. We can't force more than what they're willing to do.
Okay, I'm not talking about forcing them. I'm just saying, I'm applying for a 22-story building. As we're doing the review, we think, well, they could probably build a lot more. Applicant says, well, you know what, I only have the funding for 22. This is what my numbers say. So municipality says that's fine. We can process your application at 22 stories, but we can allow in the process that if something changes, that if you so desire, we will put the zoning in there for 30. And of course, you'd have to do all of the things that you need to do in order to satisfy us that 30 is
Okay, so yes, through the chair, we would have that ability to negotiate with the land applicant as to what future permissions might be entitled on that property and not restrict them to that precise number today.
good, because it's in the city's best interest, right? If we think it's in the city's best interest, the applicant doesn't want to do it, but we don't want to stop their development and we don't want to force them, we can still make sure that that property allows for the increased density.
There is, through the chair, there is an opportunity to do that in the appropriate place.
First, good, got it, thank you.
Would it not trigger a committee of adjustment application if it was zoned for 30 and they came in for 22? Somebody might think that's not.
Through the chair, I was assuming that this was going through the OPA zoning process anyways.
Okay.
So we would just
Okay.
allow for that broader use of permitted uses.
I apologize. Thank you. Councillor Paleshi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rob, in terms of the 890 and the, it's just on the page,
329.
321, and the ratio, you said that Toronto had exceeded their targets. For us to achieve the 40%, why could we not request, send a request up to the region to reduce that 890 down to a number that's more, that looks a lot better for, in terms of employment?
Through the chair, so the provincial growth plan has allocated certain population and employment targets at the regional level. So the exercise carried out at the regional levels to take that target and then divide that amongst the area municipalities. So if we took it out of ours, or at the city, it would go somewhere else to either Mississauga or Caledon. Not sure that's in anybody's best interest. They might not have the capacity to take this. So again, it's the target number that we're trying to accomplish. I think it becomes a numbers game, and really the point of this is that allows infrastructure planning, which then allows for the creation of development charge bylaws, so you can collect the correct amount of money to fund that growth when it in fact does happen. So it's a bit of a planning numbers game, but at the same time, it's setting our path to the future as well. So I would be reluctant to try to reduce that number or refuse it.
Well, I agreed up until that point. I understood everything you were saying, but if it's so important to us to achieve a 40% ratio or potentially more, and it is a numbers game, then why don't we just play with the numbers? And I'm not saying, I know the region delegates down to us to say what you're going to take, but, from what I hear, Caledon's looking for more numbers. So if there's an opportunity for us to say, we'd like a better ratio, it's very important. There's a motion that all of council supported unanimously to support a higher ratio. Then why wouldn't we then request the region to consider a lower number for Brampton?
Through you, Madam Chairman, if you remember, I believe a couple of years ago when we first started down this path, the number that Hempson had forecasted for Brampton was 919. And there were other forecasts being done in Mississauga, which were over 1 million, and also in Caledon, which had an increased number. So as the Commissioner has indicated, it's a bit of a numbers game. And it's slicing the pie up. So we have already gone from 919 now down to 890. So we feel that's an appropriate number to do infrastructure planning to 2041, so that we are not in a shortfall position regarding our DC bylaw and other master planning that has to take place.
Okay.
Yep.
Councillor Sprovieri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we have an opportunity here to really put the city in a better position than where we're headed for, as far as the job employment and residential ratios. We know that all the better jobs are not coming to Brampton. The better employers, the office in the office sector, they're not coming here, and we see that there's more. There seem to be going more to Mississauga and more downtown Toronto, and so. We'll probably have a really hard time achieving even our 37% of employment versus the residential. And it appears to me that, as we know, even though today, that there's a huge number of people that are living in Brampton and working in Mississauga, people from Caledon, Orangeville, Shelburne. You see them on Highway 410 every morning. They're all headed down into Mississauga to work. So Mississauga, they have a huge employment base, and it's growing. Their office Actually, now they're starting to attract because of the LRT going on here in Ontario, there's a lot of interest in probably from office users. Brampton is not getting that. What are we getting? Look around. We're getting logistics, mostly logistics in Brampton, which have very low assessment and not many employed. So for us to agree to take more people and make the matter even worse as we grow out with this ratio, and we know that if we don't have a healthy ratio, it's going to really be it's going to impact the residential hugely. So why would we agree to take more people? Why don't we say people should be living closer to where they work? People in Mississauga should be building more high densities to accommodate all the people that they're employing. You know, this is what makes sense. It doesn't make sense for people to move up to Shelburne and Dundalk and even beyond that, and driving through Brampton and going to Mississauga to work. There's something wrong with the whole, to me, I understand that the province wants to save the Greenbelt, and that's fine, but people are now jumping, and they're going further and further, and they still have to drive down into the GTA for work, because there's no jobs up there. Caledon is not getting good quality jobs. They're just getting logistics just like we are. Actually, they're turning farms into truck yards now. So there's really something wrong with the way we're headed, and there may be an opportunity for us to say, hold on, guys. If we're not getting the jobs that were forecasted for us to get, so why would we accept more people? Which is going to impact our health, financial health here as we grow, as we mature. So, I totally agree with Councilor Palashi that this has to really be looked at closely and strategized, because we're just digging ourselves in a bigger hole, deeper hole, I think, by accepting higher numbers and that we cannot accommodate, that jobs cannot be provided. So, why go in a self-destruction mode and when we could do something about it? So I think this is something that we really have to think out, and perhaps with our consultant, something we have to brainstorm with what's his name, Beasley. Yeah, and see what let's get his opinion on this matter, and give us some insight on what he thinks about what we should be doing on this.
Well, Councillor Spobieri, that's exactly what this report is recommending, that we do public consultations, that we reach out to all the various parties. And right now, the report does make reference to what we already have approved in terms of the growth numbers, but the whole exercise is to, and the recommendation is to proceed with taking into consideration.
The trend.
The Commissioner wants to speak.
If I may, through the chair. Certainly I can understand some of your concerns. I want to put a bit of a positive spin on this, though. I think that Brampton's very well positioned to grow on the employment side in the future. With the university coming, our massive shift in ridership on our transit, the fact that we're on the innovation corridor, office attraction around the GTA, outside of the downtown core, we've noticed over the last couple of years that the downtown core is attractive to people. That's been the center of the office universe. They can attract employees from all across the GTA. But I think there's a lot of strategic elements here in Brampton that are coming to fruition that will really position us well. So we are working on the economic development strategy. Some of these game changers, I think, will put us in good stead. But at the same time, we have to better understand the changing nature of employment as well. More mixed use, work from home, other things that are are creating employment, but not in the traditional office campus that we might be accustomed to. So we have to take all that into account. But at the same time, housing affordability across the GTA has been an issue. So we have some role to play in making sure that housing options are available to people, as do the other GTA municipalities as well. So it's a delicate balance, I don't dispute that at all, but I do think that this city is well positioned for the future.
Okay. Someone like to move receipt of the report? Councillor Palashi. All those in favor? That's carried. 7.3 is, did you withdraw that, Councillor Gibson? Thank you. Councillor Gibson? Okay.
I keep getting told I don't speak loud enough. I find that hard to believe. Thank you, Madam Chair. When I saw this report, boy, my antenna went way up, and the red flags were just being thrown at me. Since then, staff has provided Councillor Moore and I with some sketches of what, and plans of what the applicant is showing to go on the property. But I still need to have some assurances that we're not going to have another big blue house. This is from the outside anyway, looks to me to be a perfectly good home. And somebody's come in an older established area, and somebody's come in and wants to demolish it and rebuild. And I asked staff that if, the neighbors were circulated at all, if there's a sign on the property so the neighbors would know, and the answer was no. So what's going to happen here, in all likelihood, is that as soon as the machine pulls up and the wrecking ball pulls up to knock this down, the neighbors are going to go crazy, and we'll get lots of calls. So I want to just get some comfort here that what's going to be rebuilt on here is going to fit into the neighborhood, and the rest of council doesn't have this. We just got this just before the meeting started. So maybe staff can provide us with a little bit of details verbally about what the applicant is proposing to put on after, and if council gives the permission for a demolition permit on this property.
So through you, Councillor Moore, the application for a site plan application was received and is approved, and so the information that Councillor Gibson was speaking to is some documents that I had provided through to him and Councillor Moore just at the outset of the meeting, given that we've had some discussion on the matter. And in those documents, it shows what we had approved for the site plan. And really through our mature neighborhoods site plan that was created in the not too, recently. And so on those drawings, it shows that the dwelling that's proposed to be constructed on the site is a two-story dwelling. And it shows the location of the dwelling as well, and the footprint of the dwelling, which is comparable to the footprint of the existing dwellings beside it as well. In reviewing these types of site plan applications, staff is very cognizant of really being sensitive to the character of the neighborhood and the dwellings that are on the adjacent properties. And so in the review of that site plan application, we looked at it through those lenses. We ensured that the height of the building, the two-story height, which is, I believe it's 8.5 meters in total, is comparable to what would occur on the other properties if they were to also put a second story on, or other properties in the area which actually currently have 2 stories already. The setback of the dwelling to the front property line is 6 meters, which is one and the same as the dwellings on the adjacent sites. The rear yard setback is comparable as well, as shown on the site plan drawings. They have setbacks that are not to the greatest extent as what they could be, in that the zoning bylaw would permit the house to be larger, but that's not what is proposed. Staff has worked with the applicant towards certain changes on the urban design character of the house as well. We've asked for certain changes to the porch, to the material treatment of the building to ensure that the house then in its size and its location and its design is sensitive to the area dwellings. So that essentially is a summary of really the items that we had considered through the site plan application.
Thank you. So, just to confirm, the neighbors won't know until the wrecking ball shows up. And there's nothing we can do about that, I'm assuming. When the new build starts, there won't be anything circulated to the neighborhood, but what's going to be built on there. And there'll be no sign on the property, council won't really, there'll be no report will have to come back, will it, for council to approve on the new applicant, a new application?
So through Councillor, the site plan application is resolved now. So the approval for site plan is granted. The only thing that's with committee at this time is the demolition permit through the building division. So that is correct, Councillor Gibson, that there's nothing from the site plan standpoint that would have to come back for any additional approvals or to this committee.
Okay, so when and if the calls start to come in, should we have the people call you or email you so you can provide? I'm assuming you could provide this information for them so they can have some comfort that we're not going to get another big monster house in their neighborhood.
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Gibson, once the permit is issued for demolition and any construction thereafter, all calls can be directed to our department. So specifically, you could give them my name if that came up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is it possible, or desirable, I guess, for a lot of infill, whether it's the townhouses down on Clarence or whatever, where there's a redevelopment within an existing neighborhood, there's oftentimes a display board put up that shows, coming soon kind of thing, or the artist's rendering of what it is, so that, can we require that as part of our process for these? Because I think once this happens, we're seeing this in neighborhoods across the city. They're buying in existing neighborhoods. They're large, generous-sized lots, and they can accommodate a larger home. But there's going to be curiosity among the neighbors, and can we require that for them to put up a display board? So, and maybe that's something you just need to take back and consider, but it may help to reduce the number of calls. It puts, first of all, the responsibility on the applicant, but it may reduce the number of calls that come into council office or into our staff, and so you don't have to tell the same story to, a number of neighbors or people who drive by the property. And I see the lawyer wants to jump in.
So, Madam Chair, I think the idea or the suggestion that we take this back, think about it a little bit further, and then let council know in terms of what can be done is the appropriate one. You have several processes that are undertaken. So you've got the demolition in this case, but as council knows, that's been delegated to staff now. This is a holdover, is my understanding, in that this report was actually prepared before the delegation of authority bylaw had been updated. And then you've got site plan as well. And so where we park that sort of notification, I don't know, but it's something for us to think about. It's similar to what we do, for example, when someone comes in with a minor variance, or a committee of adjustment application and so on, and there's a sign out front. I think what you're suggesting is a little bit more than that, but it's something we can take back, consider, and then bring back to council.
Well, what I'm trying to do is avoid a bait and switch kind of scenario. I think it's fair to the neighbors when something like this happens that they know what's coming, and whether that's the applicant is required to circulate a rendering or whether they post on the property, a rendering of what it's going to look like? I think, either way, in my estimation, what it does is takes the pressure off of us. If we do that at the front end, puts the responsibility and the cost of that onto the applicant, and then hopefully the calls don't come into us unless they take a bit of a side trip over what it is they should be building.
Through you, Madam Chair, and just to tag on to that, and I appreciate John speaking to that, what we do want to avoid is also misleading the public into thinking that they have input into a process that's not a public process. So
I'm
we'll
not
have to.
suggesting we're asking for input. I'm just
No,
saying
exactly,
the
but
applicant
it's-
has to tell them what the city has approved.
Understood.
Once it's approved.
Understood. So I just want to make it clear to the rest of council that we wouldn't be inviting necessarily feedback, but just providing information about what is proposed and approved.
What's been approved.
Yeah, so we'll take that back.
Just
Thank you.
take it under consideration. Thanks. Councillor Fortini.
Looking at the
You've
height
done all your
restriction.
math calculations over there? Okay. And Councillor Plush, you hear
Big
that?
house
Councillor
on
Gibson,
fire.
would you like to move the report? Not really? All in favor? That's carried, thank you. All that's left are the Cycling Advisory Committee minutes. They're here for approval. Councillor Maderos, Councillor Willens?
Oh, I pulled
Oh,
8.2.
You're on 8.2? Okay, all in favor of 8.1?
Oh, yeah.
That's carried. 8.2,
Just for,
Councillor Willens.
just for the clerk's office for clarification, I was present at that meeting, not absent, and Councillor Dillon was absent.
Okay, so you make those corrections. Alrighty, there's no other business, there's no referred matters, no notice of motion. Councillors, question period. Are there any questions from members of council? I think we got it all out of our system throughout the meeting. Are there nobody here from the public to ask questions? Those three words we like to hear most. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Willens, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you.